Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third week in our Lord of the Flies GCSE revision series. What we're doing over these weeks is we're going through all of the key characters, key themes, context, key quotes, model answers, model paragraphs to help you do the best that you possibly can if you're writing about Lord of the Flies in your upcoming GCSE exams. So first week, we went through Ralph. If you haven't checked out that video, I'd highly recommend it for quotes and ideas about Ralph. Last week we did Jack. This week we're going to be going through Piggy. By the way, I also recommend the Jack one. I just don't have time to go through everything on all of the characters. So in the next weeks, we'll be looking at potentially Simon the Beast, a couple other key characters. We might combine a few of them together possibly. And then we'll be looking at some of the themes: civilization, violence, the supernatural, lots of model paragraphs, lots of key quotes, just boosting you up really. So today, Piggy, as usual, we're going to start by talking about the character and talking about what they represent and why they're important. So Piggy ultimately represents civilization, logic, rationality, arguably you could say science. So this is his wheelhouse. He's an interesting character because he speaks with a bit of an accent, like his English is not perfect. He says stuff like, we was gonna do this or we done that. Like his grammar is a bit broken, but his intelligence is not broken at all. He's, I would say, the most intelligent boy on the island. He's also got quite a tragic background. His parents have died and he's living with his auntie back in England. He's rejected by all of the boys here on the island, but he also seems to have been rejected really by all of the boys and girls and just children that he went to school with, and just generally just a bit of a reject, unfortunately. He's also physically one of the weakest, physically weak, but mentally very strong, at least in certain, or I would say intelligent. Not necessarily actually mentally strong, because he is also somewhat a little bit cowardly as well, to some extent. He doesn't really stand up to Jack. He's afraid of Jack to some level. And that's one of the reasons why the island turns to savagery, because the boy that represents civilization is to some extent weaker than the boy who represents savagery, which is Jack. Physically weak, he's got asthma, which is obviously an unfortunate kind of lung condition, respiratory condition. He's also, bespectacled. He has his glasses. And that's a big problem. Obviously, that's one of the ways that Golding shows his decline and his eventual death, because it starts with, he has one of the lenses of his glasses broken, so he can't see perfectly well. And then he has his glasses stolen by when Jack creates his tribe. And so then he's literally staggering around the island, basically blind. And then obviously he's killed by being crushed under a rock, a boulder, which is very, very sad. His death is very important because it signifies the end of civilization. While Ralph was being advised by Piggy, and that's the other thing, he's an advisor to Ralph, I suppose. Advisor to Ralph. While Ralph is being advised by a much smarter, more logical boy, which is Piggy, Ralph is doing a bit of a better job as chief. Ralph in his own right is also growing as a character and becoming a better leader. But Piggy definitely is one of the biggest catalysts of that. He helps accelerate that within Ralph. His death signifies the end of civilization because it's not just him who dies, it's also the conch that shatters. And the conch in many ways is an object that represents Piggy. So, Piggy, as long as the conch is there, and obviously Piggy's the one really that discovers the conch, as long as the conch is there, Piggy has a way of manipulating the boys to be allowed to speak. So if he's holding the conch, even though the boys don't like him, they accept that in the rules that they've created in this society, he has the right to hold the floor and to speak. The conch is this vivid pink color at the beginning when they first discover it, and by the end it's kind of blistered into this kind of bleached white color. So it's lost power in the same way Piggy has. So there is a parallel between them. And then when Piggy dies, Piggy is holding the conch, and the conch gets shattered along with Piggy. The conch explodes into tons of fragments, and this is the end of civilization. Jack shows no remorse for Piggy's death. He's like, yeah, you see, this is what you get. And that is then the real ending of any form of morality as well, because Jack snatches Sam and Eric, forces them to join his tribe. So now it's just Ralph left alone to fend against the rest. And they're going to try and cut his head off and offer it to the Lord of the Flies, right? So Piggy's death really is the end of any rationality, any logic, any civilization. It's the full descent into unbridled savagery. Piggy is also what you would call a dynamic deuteragonist. So a deuteragonist in some sense is really just what we would call a sidekick character. So they're not the main character, but they're friends with and close to the main character. Now, Ralph doesn't really like Piggy that much, but he understands he needs someone like Piggy. He talks about, Piggy could think. He's dynamic. Piggy is dynamic because Piggy does try to, adapt with the circumstances that they're presented with the island. He forms a lot of intelligence of what the boys should do with like making the fire and all that good stuff. So yeah, that's basically Piggy in a nutshell. So let's start looking through quotes. I've got loads of quotes for Piggy today, and then we'll try and do a model paragraph on Piggy at the end as well. So first quotes, this comes from Ralph. Piggy, for all his ludicrous body, had brains. So you've got the juxtaposition of that, the juxtaposition of Piggy had a ludicrous body. So this is very insulting language, but he did have brains. So it shows, like I said, that he's physically weak, but intelligent. So he has value through his intelligence. Jack has no time for Piggy's intelligence. That's one of the reasons why Jack hates Piggy, because Piggy is smart enough to actually outthink Jack and say things about what Jack wants to do, which actually undermines Jack's authority, basically. That's one of the main reasons he hates Piggy. Piggy was an outsider, not only by accent, which did not matter, but by fat and asthma and specs and a certain disinclination to manual labor. So this quote is obviously all about how Piggy is rejected, like I said, but it's this long, insulting list. And you can almost imagine as you hear this long, insulting list, that it almost represents the boys in the way that they mock Piggy and they talk about him. They just keep going. There's this long list of insults. You're this, you're that, you're the other. Yeah, it's bullying. It's horrible. And so this list helps to show that. And just the very simple clause, Piggy was an outsider. It's so blunt and so simple. Also is really important to understand that he just is. And all of the other boys recognize this. And sadly, even today, there is that sense sometimes that you meet people sometimes who they just do seem to be a little bit of an outsider for one reason or another. And you can almost feel that sometimes with certain people. You should always try and be inclusive as best you can. But there are people that you just get that vibe. And unfortunately, Piggy, that is very much his vibe, even though that's the tragedy of the story in some sense, because Piggy is actually very, very valuable, but they can't see past his physical appearance. And they even say, there's no way he could be chief and stuff just because of the way he looks, which is really sad. Piggy often speaks like an adult. So at one point when the boys go off dancing, I forget which chapter this is, so I apologize. I think maybe chapter 5. He's like, you're all acting like a crowd of kids or acting like a bunch of kids. So when he's talking like this, it's slightly comical and it parallels adults and adulthood. So Piggy positions himself as being like an adult, but the problem is that adults typically actually do have authority over children, and children do actually often choose to listen to what adults say. They might resent it, but they grudgingly typically accept what their particularly parents say, right? Piggy doesn't have that authority or charisma of a parent or an adult, so he isn't listened to. So it adds a sense of comedy, but it also adds a sense of tragedy, because Piggy actually, if everyone just listened to Piggy, they would probably have been rescued in like 3 days. But instead, what happens? They burn half the island down. The boy with the mulberry colored birthmark gets killed. We never see him again. They find the pilot who's sort of flown down or floated down in a parachute. They think it's a beast, so they become superstitious of the beast. They kill Simon thinking he's the beast. They cut the pig's head off thinking that giving sacrifices to the beast will appease it. They kill Piggy, obviously. They crush and shatter him. And they even try and kill Ralph. None of this would have happened if Piggy was just leader or listened to even. But Piggy is certainly not perfect by any means. He says, after Simon is stabbed to death, he says, it was an accident. And that's it. So you've got these blunt, short sentences. And this shows a great deal of denial in Piggy as well. He's not able to face the fact that he actually was part of killing Simon. You know, the blood is on his hands too. And that's really interesting because you have to understand that all of these boys are still boys. They're still flawed human beings, and particularly younger boys or younger children, they're still learning civilization and morality and what to do, what's right, what's wrong. They don't know for themselves. So Piggy is not infallible. He's just the best, most moral, most logical of the boys, but he still isn't strong enough to guide them. And that's a big tragedy. Piggy uses rhetoric sometimes, which is quite interesting to watch. This is part of his good ability to argue and to, you know, try and get the boys to wake up. So he says, which is better, to have rules and agree or to hunt and kill? So here we have what's called a dichotomy, which he creates between have rules and agree or hunt and kill. So he creates these dichotomies to be persuasive. It's also obviously a rhetorical question. Yeah. So we see this irony that when Piggy has the conch and when Piggy gets to speak, he actually makes some really good points, and he can argue to and reason with the boys in a way that's far better than many of the others. But because of the way he looks and because of his reputation, it doesn't matter. The boys won't listen to him. This is kind of deep, but you could almost argue sometimes that that's what we do with our own politicians and our own leaders to some extent, right? Sometimes we elect someone who seems to have kind of charisma, maybe a better looking person, whatever, funny, those kinds of things, the kind of the cool kid, the popular kid. But that isn't necessarily what we need as a society. Quite often what we probably need is someone a bit more like Piggy, not necessarily the most attractive person, not necessarily the most charismatic person, but someone who thinks through things really clearly and has good principles and morals. But the boys don't understand that. And arguably we don't either. So it's easy to point fingers, but there you go. What are we? Humans or animals or savages? What's grown-ups going to think? So this bit, partly, it's obviously a long list or lots of questions, interrogatives. So again, he's challenging the boys. He's trying to get them to think. It shows he's kind of frustrated in his tone here. But also we've got the broken grammar. And again, like I said, that's a part of the problem. He's not eloquent in the way he speaks. So even though what he says is really important, he speaks with this different accent to the other boys. He doesn't fit in. And the lack of grammar can be picked on as well sometimes. Piggy says about that when the beast, when they think they see the beast, Piggy does this whole long monologue really, but I'm not going to do the whole monologue, but I'll do a chunk of it. Life is scientific. That's what it is. In a year or two, when the war is over, they'll be traveling to Mars and back. I know there isn't no beast, not with claws and all that, I mean, but I know there isn't no fear either, unless we get frightened of people. So this is a fantastic quote for Piggy, and to sum up the position of the boys on the island. So, you know, he's merging a lot of contextual stuff here as well. So we see that this is set in the war, in World War II, because of the fact that you've got that there's the war going on. You've got links to science and technology. And then throughout this whole quote, you've just got this irony. The fact that Piggy's talking about, you know, we're going to be able to go to Mars. We've got all this potential as human beings. There aren't any beasts, not actual real ones with claws and stuff, but the beast is in us, right? And this then links to the quote that Ralph says right at the end, the darkness of men's hearts, or darkness of man's heart. One of the best quotes, favorite quotes in the entire novel, darkness of man's heart, yeah, sorry. And the reason that that's so important is because that's what Piggy's getting at here as well. He's saying, look, the darkness, the bad stuff isn't actually a beast, it's us, the fact that we can't get ourselves together. And finally, at the end, Ralph comes to notice that as well and understand that. So that's what Piggy's talking about here. And again, that just shows his intelligence. But the boys, after he says all this, they just kind of ignore him or they laugh at him a bit as well. So again, he just doesn't really have any chance. Few more quotes. I'll have to get through these fairly quickly if I'm going to do a model answer as well. So I just take the conch to say this. I can't see no more and I got to get my glasses back. Okay, so I've talked to you already about the physical deterioration of Piggy, yeah? So part of this is when he loses his glasses and he's gone blind. So, you know, the fact that he literally cannot see anymore is a big weakening of civilization, and it's a weakening of his character, and it's very tragic as well. There's a lot of tragedy to this. I got the conch. So the one time when Piggy stands up for anything is when he stands up for the rules. Piggy is brave when it comes to the rules. At another time in the novel, Piggy just simply says, I got the conch, I got a right to speak. He just says it very matter of fact. So Piggy isn't brave when it comes to protecting himself and fighting against Jack and arguing with the boys, but he is brave for the conch. And that makes him very noble and quite endearing, the fact that he doesn't want to stand up for himself, but he does want to stand up for civilization. I just love that about him. I think that's really cool and brave. The true wise friend called Piggy. This is what you might call an epiphany at the end from Ralph. So once he's rescued, because the naval officer comes on shore, he breaks down crying and he reflects on the darkness of man's heart and he laments the death of his true wise friend called Piggy. So the fact that's also very tragic, right? The fact that throughout the novel, when Piggy was alive, Ralph wasn't able to appreciate Piggy. But now that Piggy's dead and he's nearly just been hunted and killed, he realizes how valuable Piggy is. And I think that we can all learn from that. I think that we can learn to value what we have more, be grateful for what we have more, look for the beauty and the intelligence and the good in what we have and the people we hang out with. I think that's a great message. And this is a very extreme version of that. And finally, the martyred expression of a parent who has to keep up with the senseless ebullience of the children. So this is a metaphor, and it again positions Piggy as a suffering parent. So sometimes kids just don't want to do what they're told, and that's what Piggy has to face the whole time. There's also some foreboding in here because the word martyred means to die for a cause, die heroically for a cause. And obviously that is what happens for Piggy. Piggy never gives up on democracy, civilization, science, logic, rationality, morality. He never gives up on those things, but he dies defending them. And obviously when Roger chucks that boulder on him and smashes him and kills him, and you know, it's a horrible death. He's like lying there twitching, right? It's awful, bleeding, right? He is martyred effectively. Okay, cool. So that's some of the key quotes. We've got a little bit of time now to go through Piggy and looking through a model paragraph. So same as I've been doing with everything else, we're just going to keep it nice and simple. How is Piggy presented? Let's, as a matter of fact, just quickly write that down. How is Piggy presented in the novel? And we'll just pick out one of the points for that out of the ones that I had talked about. And I think the easiest one is probably to link him to civilization, logic, and rationality. I think the one that I will actually look at today with you is the tragedy of his death. Yeah. So one of the most significant ways that Piggy is presented is through the tragedy of his death and what that creates or what that symbolizes in the pseudo society which these teenage boys created for themselves. Piggy's deterioration parallels the deterioration or the atrophy, let's say, of the conch. and the amount of respect which the boys have for it. Initially, Piggy has specs which symbolizes or have connotations of his vision, both generally and for the island. Likewise, the conch is a pink color. However, Piggy is left blind at the end of the novel, and this marks the fact that Piggy is unable to control the island or overcome the foil, Jack, as he pushes them into savagery. When the conch explodes, Piggy also dies. This marks the end of civilization. And this death and destruction marks the end of civilization. This is significant, well, I should do reader response first, I'm sorry. As readers, we feel very sorry for Piggy, but we also feel that his demise was inevitable, since he is always referred to as the outsider. As this is significant when considering Golding and when the novel was written, since weaker leaders and civilization fell to the charisma and tyranny of Adolf Hitler, causing causing World War II. And I could expand on that more, obviously, if we had a bit more time, but I think that that's a pretty good kind of way of writing about Piggy. So you're just talking about Piggy's significance, linking to different parts of the novel, thinking about how he develops, then linking that to how we feel as readers. We feel sorry for him, but there is this inevitability. And then finally, obviously, looking at how that perhaps links to the way Piggy is a softer leader, even though he would have been a good leader in terms of actually looking after people, versus people like Jack, who, as we spoke about last week, perhaps are more representative of stronger but tyrannical leaders like Adolf Hitler, Stalin, Mao, etc. So there's a paragraph for you. As always, if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions, please comment below. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks very much, everyone.